Welcome back to the Indian Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Raj Balkaran, and for this edition, I have a special guest for you, Dr. Anya Golovkova, who will be speaking about a shared passion of ours, a really profound and fascinating text called the Devī Māhātmya, the greatness of the glories of the goddess. We'll talk about a little bit about her work as an academic, her interest in the text, and there'll be a special opportunity we'll touch on towards the end of the podcast where you just might have a chance to study with her online. So, Anya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate being here, and thank you so much for your flexibility, Raj.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Listen, we were just chatting before recording. Listen, we do what we can, just to get the word out there for those listening. I can tell from your stance and your disposition that clearly you care about students and you're interested in teaching. Let's talk a little bit about maybe the Devī Māhātmya. Tell us a bit about how you discovered it and sort of your relationship to the text, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I first got exposed to Devi Mahatmya in the fall of 2000, is what I think. And it was Navaratri time. And I sort of started studying meditation at the Himalayan Institute of New York. There used to be this bookstore, East West bookstore, very famous. And so I started studying meditation. That was sort of my entry point. And then from there, I got really interested in Sanskrit. So I was studying with students of Sri Brahmananda Saraswati, who had a little ashram just north of New York City, Ananda Ashram. And so I went up there and they chant Devi Mahatmyam for Navaratri, which is how this text is used ritually a lot and for a lot of Shakti practitioners. So the guru of the ashram was really into Sanskrit, and I think that's really sort of guided me into this path that I ended up taking. So my introduction to Devi Mahatmyam is through chanting it. I started chanting, and then I chanted some more, and then I started going to India for Navaratri, and Chandipat or Devi Mahatmyam is, very prominent in the places that I've been, which were always associated to some extent with goddess worship, or primarily with goddess worship, or really only with goddess worship. So, um, I spent some time at temple to Tripura Sundari, Rajarajeshwari in Andhra Pradesh. And for Navaratri, we would chant Chandipat, but also Lalita Sahasranama, 1,000 names of the goddess Lalita. But there's something about Devi Mahatmyam. It resonates with me so much.
Yeah.
And Sanskrit resonates with me a lot, which is why I'm excited to teach it as a Sanskrit course. Maybe because I've chanted it so much and I've heard it chanted. It's like every sentence, it's so simple. It uses shloka meter. Simple. But I'm reading every sentence and it just resonates a lot. So, yeah, it's a meaningful text for me.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. I love conversations with folks of various stripes on their logical interest. We happen to have a great overlap here, both in terms of a abiding interest in the Devī Māhātmya and fascination, and maybe we'll speak more towards what you think are maybe interesting features of the text. But similarly, I was engaged in a scholarly paradigm studying at the University of Toronto. I was doing a master's on the Valmiki Ramayana. I had this real fascination with the tension between ascetics and kings, and the sort of worldly, otherworldly tension at the heart of Hinduism, perhaps. And at the time, I was engaging in chanting the Devi Mahatmya, or elements of it, or certainly some of the hymns from it in a spiritual context. And my life was well compartmentalized, where I spent all kinds of time with spiritual teacher, spiritual master, looking mostly at what he would call moksha shastra, but also Devi Mahatmya very, very, very deeply. And it never dawned on me to actually let as an object of intellectual inquiry the text, because it was quite compartmentalized. It's sort of like, well, I might be a psychotherapist and I might have a group of friends, but maybe or maybe not. I may not want to be working while I'm hanging out or working. So, you may have lanes. And so it dawned on me that this text is framed by this very same tension that I seem to love, the exiled king um, receiving Torah's teachings. And so I ended up proposing that for my PhD, and no regrets there because I'm able to engage the text intellectually and um, with respect to storytelling, spiritually and chanting, and it's just such a fascinating text and so revolutionary in what it's saying. I mean, it really has a vision of the divine that exceptionally rare and unprecedented in Indic paradigms, and one that hasn't survived really in this uh, on this level in any other tradition that I can think of. And so maybe you might want to say a little bit about what is it about the text and the content of the narrative that really resonates with you and intrigues you, perhaps maybe even some of your favorite dimensions of it.
Sure. Um, so unlike you, I have not done academic work on the Devi Mahatmya, but I teach it every year in my Hinduism class because I just love this text so much. I mean, as you know very well, but perhaps our listeners may not, the text has a framing narrative where we're kind of faced with, the king, Suratha, king of good chariots, and the merchant, Samadhi, the merchant of high state of meditation and wisdom, are like every other practitioner. They're seeking, they're confused, they're full of turmoil and pain, emotional pain. So, the beginning of the text, we're introduced to these two people who've been betrayed by their families, by their loved ones, by their helpers and ministers, etc. And they come to a sage, Medhas, and they're like, "We don't understand. Why are we so miserable? We left. We've given them up. We're here. Why are we still thinking about them so much?" And so then the discourse begins and continues for the rest of Devi Mahatmyam. And the discourse kind of goes all over the place. Again, I haven't studied this text, the history of the text. I've read a little bit about that. But my sense is that this is a composite text that probably was formed over a period of time. And some of these hymns, they're kind of like they're their own complete thing. And probably a later insertion into Markandeya Purana, an important Sanskrit Purana. But then there is this various framing that comes from the more dominant Brahminical paradigm, which brings in other philosophical traditions like Sankhya, a little bit of yoga, a little bit of Advaita for sure, a lot of Advaita. And sort of there's interplay and resonance with other texts such as the Upanishads. Um, and so the difference, as you pointed out, is the goddess. The goddess is this martial goddess. She is, I mean, the story starts by the sage telling our two heroes about the goddess, and there are various episodes, and they usually involve battles of the goddess with demons. So the first story is Vishnu is sitting in the pralaya between the yugas, and out of his navel a lotus blooms on which Brahma sits, and Brahma is, enjoying hanging out, and then these two little demons come out. I perhaps out of Vishnu's earwax or some other impurity, God forbid. So anyway, there are these two demons, and they're like fighting, and Brahma is like, "Oh my God, what am I gonna do? Vishnu's asleep." So Brahma extols the goddess, the Yoga Nidra, to please withdraw out of Vishnu's eyes so that Vishnu could take care of this problem. So that's the first story, and then there are other stories And, one of the big ones is, as you see in my background there, this is from, Mahabalipuram, the goddess slaying the buffalo demon, Mahishasura, and Madhava and Kaitapa, etc., etc. So, there is this kind of you can read it as a feminist, as a very empowering text, like, "Oh my god, this goddess is really, um she's capable of everything. The gods are themselves praying to her to ask for her help." Um, but also there's another sort of mythological dimension to it, whereas every story is symbolic. So the buffalo demon is the ego that all of us are battling, and various other obstacles in life. So the story continues, um, and at the end, our heroes find the goddess, pray to her, worship her, and are given various boons. Which is interesting that the merchant is the one who asks for final liberation. Can't remember exactly how he puts it. The king gets to be Manu, very nice, eighth Manu, Savarni, but it's the it's the merchant who actually asked for something better than that. Do you remember? I'm just looking.
So, you're correct. It's at moksha-esque. It's the knowledge beyond the eye and the mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so the text is really encouraging, I feel, to all of us who are struggling and battling with these forces of good and evil and sometimes are completely overwhelmed and don't know what to do. But there is hope in the story that Devi does come and is available to her devotees um, when they focus on her to help them deal with their problems, big and small.
Yeah, there's so much you said that it was quite rich, and that's precisely what I was asking, what about the story is compelling or interesting to you? And yeah, without question, I think we can all agree that the Devi Māhātmya, like some chronic works, are diachronically produced, and even the Manvantara frame, which in the Makani Purana is it's a diachronic evolute. And yet, eventually, at least so I suspect and argue, it's very meaningful and synchronically meaningful taken as a whole. And so many of the themes you touch on, mm, Vishnu slumbering, like, this idea of the sleep or the Maya, the yoga nidra. That, but Maya is problematic potentially, certainly, but it's not. This text is so radical. It's like the Maya is not an obstruction to divinity; it's a manifestation of divinity. It's the power that gives us this embodied experience of individuality. This Maya is not just some Prakriti and Maya are not these experiment principles that we can just dispense with. They are the magic of being in this realm. It's really fascinating and it's sort of down to earth. What do you want? What are you looking for? You have spiritual goals. You have material goals. You want your kingdom back. Um, so it really is a fascinating text. I think, especially within the Indic world, the Hindu world thus far. Um, not only because of its extraordinarily feminine bent, but because it really, I mean, is it the case? It's a question, I suppose. I mean, is it the case that the merchant asked for something better, or is it Davy saying, maybe here is better than there? No, maybe if the world is so important to me and my very body and the king. I mean, I think it's even potentially subversive with it. The lowly merchant gets moksha and the king is glorified.
Yeah, I like that. I like that reading. Yeah, he asked for self-realization. Well, it depends, right? This is not Tantra, this is Puranas. It's a Puranic text told in the format of stories, mythological stories, stories about the goddess, stories about cosmology. And so I think in this text, yes, the merchant does ask for what is the highest for this text. But certainly, if we were reading it through the lens of the tantric traditions, then you know, in the tantras, the goddess grants both liberation and enjoyment. And I sort of, in my own personal beliefs, tend more towards that. But as I read this text, I also read it as a historian of religion. So I look at kind of like seams between the stories and how things are put together. So to me, the story when the goddess is produced by the Shakti of the gods is kind of suspect, a little bit suspect, because, she's not supreme in that moment. She's being produced by the gods in their need.
Well,
And
that's a fascinating note, and this moment where she's produced by the outrage or the externalized wrath of the disempowered gods. That's an interesting question. Do they create her, or do we read that through the lens of episode one, where she's there, and Brahma hasn't created the next epoch yet, and she's there. I mean, I suppose there's margin for interpretation there, but really, it's fascinating. Do they create her, or do they manifest her? She's already part of creation, and these are some of the many intrigues of the text that the listeners and the learners out there might like to engage. Tell us a bit about maybe the Sanskrit piece. For you, what was that journey like for you?
um So I kind of struggled on my own and studied on my own as much as I can. Then I started going to this in the summer to Ananda Ashram, and there was this amazing scholar, Dr. Ramkaran Sharma, who used to come there and just read with us in the summer. And this is kind of the format that I'm following in in this yoga studies course. I'm not going to ask the students to tell me everything about this text as I did when I taught Sanskrit at Cornell as a PhD student. I'm going to present the text. I'm going to read the verse. I'm going to parse it. I'm going to explain exactly how it works grammar wise, and exactly how the compounds work and all the nitty gritty, but also talk about the resonance of the verses. So, Dr. Ankaran Sharma, I think he was the vice chancellor of major Sanskrit university in Varanasi, perhaps. And he would just come in the summers and enjoy and hang out with us and read all sorts of things. He never read Devi Mahatmya with us. He read a lot of Kavya. He read some Panini, which like went completely over my head. And a few other things. So I was enjoying, but also I felt like I really can learn this language. Very interested in languages. I'm a language person. I'm from Russia. English was a foreign language for me, second language. So I really wanted to learn more about the Sanskrit. For me, there was always a lot of resonance in the Sanskrit verses and in Sanskrit sounds. So I ended up applying for master's programs, and I got into Columbia and did my master's there. And I studied with Somdev Vasudeva, who is a scholar of tantric studies. And that was amazing. And then I ended up going and doing a research master's with his advisor, Professor Sanderson, Alexa Sanderson, who is sort of the guru, the contemporary guru of tantric studies, sort of the European side of things. And then I ended up just applying to a few programs for my PhD. Honestly, I never had this sort of path mapped out. Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I was like, okay, uh, this is what happened. I used to read the Gita all the time around that like between 2000 and 2007, like I read the Gita so many times. And to me, it was like the next right thing. I've kind of worked it out. Okay, just do the next right thing. So that was it. I went to Columbia and did the next right thing, which was to study Sanskrit. And from there, everything kind of just like unfolded. And here I am. Sort of one thing led to another. There were all these continuities from what I was already interested in the goddess traditions, with what I ended up studying. And then there was also a little bit of a disconnect too between academic and sort of devotional. But now as a teacher, I'm bringing those sides of myself together and trying to really, in my teaching, I'm able to integrate who I am deeply on a deep level. Like what is my mission? With how I'm teaching about Hindu traditions and Buddhist traditions. So for me, this is an exciting piece because I'm at a small liberal arts college, like Forest College, and I don't teach Sanskrit there. There's just no, um, there's no space for Sanskrit. There's space for like intro to Hinduism, that sort of thing, and goddess traditions. So this is really exciting to kind of get back to my roots and work with this text closely and also dig back into Sanskrit grammar, which is really fun. But this text is fairly simple. I think, grammar-wise, it's fairly simple, so that's kind of nice for students. You get to study something that they will definitely be understanding. But also those who haven't studied Sanskrit, I think, would also get a lot out of this course because that's what I did. I didn't know anything, and I was just sitting there listening and absorbing what I could, and eventually I wanted to study more formally. So,
Yeah.
a combination of a few things. Sanskrit, it's a Sanskrit language course, so reading the verses to the meanings, but also looking at it as a historian of religion and bringing in my perspective and sort of trying to tease out all the different layers, philosophical layers that we find in this text. So for example, you brought up Maya, sort of a very Advaita Vedantin idea, but then it's also combined with devotion to the goddess.
Yeah. So, regarding your teaching of the Devi Mahatmya, tell us a bit about the opportunity to study with you. What was the upcoming course, Yogic Studies, maybe a bit about the scope of the course, maybe a bit about what preparedness should prospective students have, what level of Sanskrit knowledge they need. Just a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, yogic studies build us as Sanskrit 206. So ideally, you have 1 year of Sanskrit where you've studied all the basics. And you're now proceeding to reading the texts. As I mentioned, this is not a challenging text grammatically. So, really, any level is welcome. And I also welcome those who have not started studying Sanskrit. Let this be your inspiration to get excited about the language as well as the philosophical topics in the text and the stories of the goddess. So Sanskrit 206, it's part of the series that they have. Dr. Antonio Rappel teaches a series of courses on yogic studies, and then other specialists are teaching kind of their favorite things and bringing them in. And mine is Devi Mahatmyam. So, we'll get to enjoy the text on different levels.
Yeah, and what's the Yogi studies? I'm not sure if this one's different. Often courses are 4 modules, and the language courses obviously are probably different. But what's the structure like, and how long?
Yeah, so yeah, this is different from the seminar style courses. So this is a Sanskrit course. So we meet twice a week for 9 weeks, and we read every day. So I'm kind of budgeting for 10 verses a day. But also, we'll see how we go. Sometimes it takes longer, and I'm sure there'll be questions. So I think we'll be able to get through or to dig in deeply into first and second chapter and perhaps get a start on the third or perhaps not. I'm not sure. And so it's an introduction to reading the Devi Mahatmyam and reading the Sanskrit text. Am I missing anything from your question?
Yeah, I know. Whether it's here on the New Books Network, I often ask sort of purposely naive questions. I imagine young will have. So we may go to a chapter or two. There'll be 10 verses a day. That all sounds good. Perhaps it's fair to say the Devi Mahatmya is a little more tricky than the Bhagavad Gita, but certainly not as difficult as Kavya. Um, uh, so sort of how many, certainly it's not, of course, for beginners, how much Sanskrit do you think folks might need in order to broach the course? Or what tools might they need while in the course of it?
1 year is sufficient. I used to teach this in my first semester intermediate at Cornell. So in terms of grammar, Puranas love perfect tense. So you can go and review perfect tense if you haven't studied it before, and you can look at the rules and all that, but what the text is trying to do is create this sort of archaic atmosphere, like this is of old, this happened a long Purana, that's right. Uh, so I think it's on the level of the Bhagavad Gita, but although I haven't looked at the Gita as recently, but I think they're quite similar. This uses shloka, fairly simple. The invocation verses are nice and I always include them, but they're usually written at a different meter. The rest is definitely manageable for somebody who has some basic Sanskrit, but also for anyone who is interested in the text and interested in the worship of the goddess and interested in these stories.
Great. So will there be particular texts or tools that students will need or have access to? Do they online dictionaries, or will they be a course book they need to purchase, or notes, or what would that look like?
No, I prepared basically, I typed in Devanagari the text, and I'm providing that. There is also a e-text transliteration of the text in lesson script that's been floating around. So I also share that with the students. And we'll be using online tools. And that's what we will spend during the first lecture. Right now, my favorite one is sanskritdictionary.org. It's sort of the simplest to use, but also has pulls from a lot of different dictionaries, which is really nice. Very easy interface. But I will talk to students about what else is available. There are some interesting new tools that are being developed that we'll take a look at as well.
That sounds great. I've got a couple students who I mentioned it to. They're of course interested in Devi Māhātmya. We've had some Devi Māhātmya courses at the Indian Muslim school. They're more the Indian Muslim school is sort of a hybrid paradigm of sort of super smart teachers, if you will, or it's sort of hybrid where not it shares wisdom teachings, but not unmoored from scholarship and sort of Muslim reality. So it's really sort of fascinating. Part of the reason why I found this was because there's not that sort of niche hybrid uh, pedagogy. I think that's done fairly well. I mean, all too often folks can be a little bit reductionistic, or they can go down the deep end of being unmoored from practical reality as well. So we've had some Devi Mahatmya courses. Interestingly enough, the only actual Devi Mahatmya course that I've taught in terms of uh, a narrative read, literary read, of course, is at either place. I haven't even done that Royal platform in that respect. Seth Powell is Dr. Seth Powell now is a relatively recent graduate of Harvard and has founded this platform. And um, a couple of students were interested in Devi Mahatmya, certainly interested in doing the Sanskrit. I think perhaps at some point start teaching the Sanskrit in Muslim school, but I'm really glad that course exists and it's put on my radar, and I reach out to that, probably referring folks to there for when they want to study some of the Sanskrit, the grammar of the Devi Mahatmya. Was there anything else about course? That's you're anything else? I don't have any particular agenda other than showcasing yourself and your work and your learning opportunity. And is there anything else you'd like us to touch on?
Yeah, before I go and talk about my agenda, let me touch upon what you just talked about, which is your course on the Devi Mahatmyam at Yogic Studies. I think those two courses are going to be very complementary. So I will certainly recommend your course to students who are reading the Sanskrit to get more of the background on the entire text. And I think the students who've taken your course and who have read or who've thought about Devi Mahatmya with you in whatever format you've done this already, I think this would be a good course for them as well. Because Sanskrit is fascinating and it's really interesting to look at the mechanics and really see, well, what does the text say? What does the text really say? And play around with words and stuff. So my agenda honestly is to enjoy. I just love this so much. It's so much fun. I want to sit with students, read this wonderful text, and savor. I mean, what else is that?
Yeah, spoken like, someone well acquainted with the Deity, so, this whole kind of aesthetic ideal of eschewing the world and eschewing enjoyment. I'm not saying that the Deity is not without wisdom or sort of, wisdom on the pitfalls of the world, particularly of power, but certainly in Devi Mahatmya, we whether it's tantra older than we think, or this is coming from a pre-tantric, sort of pre-tantra mindset. Either way, certainly there's this turn back towards the world and governing the world and enjoying and it's beautiful. That's a beautiful ethos, I think, to enjoy a text, to enjoy Sanskrit, as much as possible. That's great. So for those listening, and then I imagine, I'm sure, Seth is very savvy with marketing communications. I'm sure he has sent a note out to the folks who've taken the Devī Māhātmya course with me, see if you want to read the Sanskrit. But for those who are hearing about this for the first time, the link is in the podcast notes. It's SKT206, the Yogic course, which is really interesting because I think my course was YS206. They just happened to line up. The codes for the content courses within the codes for the language course of just they need to line out, so they're both 206.
Interesting. Well, I know Seth was thinking about your course and how to distinguish this one, which is why he called it reading the Devī Māhātmya.
Well, we don't do any, and this is a really same text. We didn't do any reading or Sanskrit in that course. It was for people interested in the content. We did a literary read of the content in English with, I believe I had a new translation or excerpts thereof that I included, and just commenting on, what does this mean? What does this mean more in terms of a little bit the world behind the text, but mostly the world within the text and the world in front of the text. And so we didn't look at the Sanskrit at all. So this is very different, and I think you're actually right. It's complementary. So it's STT 206 reading the Devī Māhātmya. It's May the 5th. Yes. To July the 2nd. So we've got to get this podcast out ASAP. And it's not a mistake. I think that covers our basis. Anything else that you wanted to touch on?
No, I mean, if folks have questions, they're most welcome to get in touch with me. I'm all over the internet. They can easily find my email. Or contact me through Yogic Studies. But I look forward to seeing you. Not you, Raj, but you, the listener.
I want to take your course.
Hey, you're welcome to. No, seriously, you're welcome to. If you stay in New York, I'll hook you up. I'm full Avenue City in Harlem.
That's great. That sounds great. Okay, well, thank you very much for putting on the podcast today, and I'm sure many students will look forward to taking a deep dive into the Sanskrit story world of the Devī Māhātmya with you. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Raj.
Okay, until next time, keep well, folks, and keep contemplating this little thing called the Devī Māhātmya and the power of the goddess. Bye for now.